welcome to my channel. Did you know that 3,000 years ago, cavemen had a very interesting way of treating their women? You see, back then, the only form of birth control that they knew was the pull-out method. But sometimes the woman would forget to ask the man to pull out in time. And so, when a baby was born, they had to find a way to determine if it was really the man's child or someone else. Now, men were jealous and possessive, just like they are today. So they came up with the most brutal way of finding out if the baby was really theirs. If the baby was crying, they knew that it wasn't their baby because they believed that if it was, then the baby wouldn't cry. But if the baby stopped crying after being thrown into the air, then they knew that it was their baby. Because babies could sense when they were being thrown in the air and would stop crying. But there was a problem. Sometimes the baby would stop crying not because it was the man's child, but because it was too scared of being dropped. So they needed a foolproof way of finding out for sure. And that's when they came up with the idea of the jealousy test. The jealousy test was a way of testing if a woman was a virgin before she got married. And if she wasn't, then they would throw the baby in the air to see if it was the man's child. But this test wasn't as simple as it sounds. It required a lot of preparation and a whole village to carry it out. First, they would take the woman who was suspected of not being a virgin and bring her to the center of the village. Then they would have all the men line up, each holding a stick or a spear. The men would close their eyes and the woman would have to walk between them without touching anyone. If she managed to do this, then she passed the test and no one would believe that she wasn't a virgin. But if she touched even one person, then the men would open their eyes, grab her, and cut off her, you guessed it, her hair. Can you imagine the struggle? This test was not only humiliating for the woman, but also dangerous, because these men were angry and jealous, and wouldn't think twice before punishing her. But the worst part was that other women would watch this happen, and some of them would even cheer it on. They wanted to make sure that their daughters didn't end up like her. You might be wondering why the men didn't just, ask her or check if she had a hymen. Well, you see, they believed that if a woman wasn't a virgin, then she would somehow magically know how to hide it. They also believed that the hymen was a solid wall that would only break during sex. But if a woman wasn't a virgin, then her hymen would be loose and wouldn't bleed when it broke. But let's be honest. Even if the hymen was a reliable way of checking if a woman was a virgin, it wouldn't be a very nice thing to do. Men back then, just like men today, were known to be obsessed with a woman's virginity, because they thought that it was a sign of their feminine purity and that if they lost their virginity, then they would lose their value. But you know what? Women back then were way more badass than women today. Even though they had to go through this humiliating test, they still managed to outsmart the men. How? Well, they would simply find a man who was jealous or possessive and have a secret relationship with him. Because if they got pregnant by a man who wasn't from their village, then it would be extremely hard to find out. And since no one would suspect a thing, they could raise the child as their own without having to worry about being thrown in the air like a human javelin. So you see, even though caveman women had to deal with some pretty messed up stuff, they were still able to find ways to outsmart the men. That's all for today. See you next time.